was dragged a few feet away by another agent. They threw their weight onto my back, crushing the breath out of my lungs, and violently twisted my arms behind my back. The steel handcuffs clicked shut, biting so deeply into my wrists that my fingers immediately went numb. The nerve damage I sustained that day is permanent. The world of horror fiction is filled with ghosts, demons, and the supernatural. But any true fan of the genre knows that the most terrifying stories don't involve the paranormal. The most suffocating, primal fear comes from the monsters that walk among us in broad daylight, especially when those monsters are wearing badges. We are raised to believe our homes are sanctuaries. We are told that if we follow the rules, if we are citizens, we are safe. But what happens when the very government sworn to protect you turns your neighborhood into a militarized hunting ground? Between December 2025 and February 2026, the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul were subjected to Operation Metro Surge. Thousands of heavily armed, masked federal agents from ICE and CBP flooded the Midwestern streets. It wasn't about law enforcement, it was about absolute psychological terror. It was an occupation that cost the city hundreds of millions of dollars, emptied schools, and proved that the border's brutal tactics had collapsed directly into the American interior. The following 3 stories are first-person accounts from that dark, freezing winter. These are true, human-centric nightmares of American social horror. Story 1. The Erasure of Sanctuary. Winter in St. Paul, Minnesota, is a specific kind of quiet. When the temperature drops below zero, the streets empty out. The snow muffles the sound of traffic, and everyone retreats to the warmth of their living rooms. It was a Sunday afternoon, January 18th, 2026. I was in the kitchen making lunch, listening to the hum of the furnace. My father-in-law, Scott, was asleep on the couch in the living room. He's 56 years old, a Hmong American who has been a naturalized, legal U.S. citizen for decades. He's the kind of guy who wouldn't even jaywalk. My 5-year-old son was sitting on the rug near him, quietly playing with his toy trucks. It was the definition of a peaceful, lazy Sunday. The American dream, wrapped in a blanket on a freezing afternoon. The peace shattered at exactly 1:30 p.m. It didn't start with a doorbell. It started with a violent, rhythmic pounding that actually shook the picture frames on the living room wall. My son dropped his toy and scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide. Scott woke up with a start, rubbing his face, looking disoriented. I walked into the entryway and peered through the frozen glass of the front window. My heart instantly dropped into my stomach. There were no marked local police cruisers in our driveway. Instead, 3 matte black, unmarked SUVs were parked erratically across our lawn and the street. Swarming our front porch were at least half a dozen men. They were wearing heavy olive drab tactical gear, ballistic vests, and black ski masks that completely covered their faces. Emblazoned on their vests was the aggressive slogan, "Defend the Homeland." "Who is it?" Scott asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Don't open it," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. I had seen the news. Everyone in the Twin Cities had. We knew about the unmarked vans snatching people off the streets. Before I could even reach for the deadbolt to ensure it was locked, the wood of the door frame violently splintered. They didn't wait. They didn't announce a warrant. With a deafening crack, the front door was kicked off its hinges, flying inward and smashing against the drywall. The freezing winter air rushed into the house, followed immediately by the masked men. They flooded the entryway, screaming conflicting, guttural commands. "Get on the ground! Show me your hands! Do not move!" Laser sights from their rifles swept wildly across our living room, painting red dots across the family photos, across the television, and terrifyingly, across my 5-year-old son's chest. My boy let out a blood-curdling scream, covering his ears and burying his face into the carpet. Scott stood up, holding his hands in the air. "What is going on? I am an American citizen," he yelled over the chaos. Two massive agents grabbed him, slamming him against the wall. "Get his papers," Scott yelled at me, his voice cracking with fear. "Get my ID in the drawer." I scrambled toward the kitchen counter, my hands shaking so violently I could barely open the drawer. I grabbed his U.S. passport and his Minnesota driver's license. I ran back, holding them out like a shield. "He's a citizen. Please, look at the passport. You have the wrong house." An agent stepped in front of me, raising his rifle slightly, forcing me back. "Step back now," he barked, his eyes cold and dead behind the black ski mask. He didn't even glance at the passport in my hand. It was the most horrifying realization of my life. Facts, legal status, and our identity were entirely irrelevant. They weren't there to investigate. They were there to conquer. They dragged Scott toward the broken door. He was wearing nothing but a pair of thin boxer shorts, a t-shirt, and a pair of yellow Crocs. "It's sub-zero outside. Let him put on a coat," I screamed, crying hysterically. They ignored me. In a desperate, pathetic gesture, I grabbed my son's small fleece baby blanket off the chair and threw it over Scott's shoulders as they shoved him out into the freezing Minnesota winter. Neighbors were coming out onto their porches, blowing whistles and blaring their car horns. A desperate grassroots alarm system we had all agreed on, but the agents just aimed their weapons at the crowd, forcing everyone back. They threw my father-in-law into the back of an unmarked van and sped off, leaving our front door completely destroyed and my son sobbing uncontrollably on the floor. For hours, we lived in a state of absolute, paralyzing purgatory. I called the local police. They told me they had no jurisdiction over federal operations. I called lawyers who couldn't get answers. We were terrified they were going to execute him or deport a U.S. citizen to a country he hadn't seen in decades. Finally, as the sun went down, an unmarked SUV pulled back up to our house. The doors unlocked, and Scott stumbled out into the snow, shivering violently, his lips blue from the cold. He told us they drove him to the middle of nowhere. They kept him in the freezing van for hours. It was only when they finally pulled him out to take his photograph in the freezing wind that they actually looked at his ID. They realized their catastrophic incompetence. They had kidnapped a legal citizen with zero criminal record. They didn't apologize. They didn't offer to fix the door. The Department of Homeland Security later released a statement claiming our house was the target of a sex offender raid, creating a sickening lie that Scott lived with criminals to justify their terrorism. It was a blatant, unapologetic fabrication. We fixed the door. But the sanctuary of our home is gone forever. My son still wakes up screaming in the middle of the night, terrified that the men in the masks are coming back. Operation Metro Surge taught us a chilling lesson. When the government decides you are the enemy, the Constitution is just a piece of paper, and the four walls of your home cannot protect you. Story 2. The weaponization of the mundane. By January 2026, the atmosphere in Minneapolis was toxic. The local economy was collapsing. Businesses were shuttered, and people were keeping their kids home from school. Going outside felt like stepping into an active war zone. But life still has to happen. You still have to buy groceries. You still have to walk your dog. On the morning of January 7th, I was walking my golden retriever down Portland Avenue South. It was around 9:30 a.m. The street was relatively quiet. A few yards ahead of me, a silver Honda Pilot SUV was maneuvering awkwardly. It looked like the driver had dropped something, or maybe slipped on a patch of black ice, and the vehicle ended up stopped somewhat sideways on the one-way residential street. It was a mundane, totally ordinary traffic anomaly. The kind of thing where you might honk your horn, roll your eyes, and drive around them. Inside the car were two women and a dog in the back seat. I later learned the driver was Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother and poet. and her partner, Becca, was in the passenger seat. Suddenly, the eerie quiet of the morning was shattered by the roar of heavy engines. Two unmarked federal vehicles swerved onto Portland Avenue, boxing in the Honda Pilot. Agents poured out of the vehicles. They were dressed in the same terrifying urban combat gear that had become a nightmare staple in our city. But it wasn't just their presence. It was the immediate, hyper-aggressive escalation. They swarmed the SUV like they had just cornered a notorious cartel boss, not two women trying to straighten out their car. I pulled my dog behind a thick oak tree on the sidewalk, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled out my phone and started recording, knowing how these encounters usually ended. The horror of the situation was the absolute chaos of the commands being shouted. It was a psychological trap. One agent, standing near the passenger side, was screaming at the top of his lungs, "Turn off the engine, turn the vehicle off, and throw the keys out the window." But another agent, a man later identified as Jonathan Ross, was standing near the front driver's side, screaming the exact opposite. "Clear the area, move the vehicle now, get out of here." It's a tactic designed to manufacture non-compliance. If she turned the car off, she was disobeying the order to leave. If she drove away, she was fleeing the order to stop. No matter what she did, they had the justification to use force. Through the window, I could hear Becca, the passenger, trying to de-escalate. She was yelling that they were U.S. citizens. She was a veteran. She was trying to reason with men who were actively hunting for a reason to snap. An agent physically reached through Renee's open driver's side window, trying to unlock the door or grab her. Panic took over. I heard Becca scream, "Drive, baby, drive!" Renee put the car in reverse for a split second to clear the agent's arm, then shifted into drive. She turned the steering wheel hard to the right, explicitly steering away from Agent Ross, pointing the SUV toward the open lane of traffic to escape the assault. She wasn't trying to hit anyone. She was trying to flee for her life. Agent Ross was standing off to the side. He was in absolutely no physical danger. But what he did next will haunt me until the day I die. With his left hand, Ross was casually holding his own cell phone up, filming the encounter like it was a sick souvenir. With his right hand, he drew his service weapon. He didn't brace himself. He didn't step back. He simply leaned forward, aimed his gun with one hand at the departing vehicle, and fired. 3 shots in under a second. The sound was deafening, echoing off the quiet residential houses. The Honda Pilot surged forward, out of control, careening down the street until it violently smashed into a parked car and a light pole. Glass shattered across the snow. Then, a sickening silence fell over Portland Avenue. I stood frozen behind the tree. Becca stumbled out of the passenger side of the crashed SUV. She was covered in her partner's blood, letting out a primal agonizing scream that tore through the freezing air. "You guys just killed my wife!" she shrieked, collapsing onto the asphalt. A man sprinted out of a nearby house. He ran toward the crashed car, yelling, "I'm a doctor! Let me help her! Let me check her pulse!" The federal agents formed a wall. They shoved the doctor backward. "Back up now!" one of them barked. "I am a licensed physician. She is bleeding to death," the man pleaded, holding his hands up. "I don't care," the agent replied coldly. They left Renee bleeding in the driver's seat for 8 agonizing minutes before dragging her out to the intersection. It was too late. The bullet had gone straight through her temple. She was a mother of 3, a writer who loved her community, executed because she panicked at a traffic stop. The government immediately lied. The president went on television and called it domestic terrorism, claiming she tried to run the agent over. But the video proved otherwise. Audio enhanced from the footage caught the shooter, Jonathan Ross, lowering his gun and muttering, "Fuck, bitch," right after firing. It wasn't fear. It was punitive, sociopathic anger. They turned a traffic anomaly into an execution. It made us all realize that walking out your front door meant you might never come back, simply because you looked at an agent the wrong way. The idea that a simple traffic stop can escalate into a nightmare in a matter of seconds is exactly why domestic horror is so terrifying. It strips away the illusion of control. I want to know your thoughts. Have you ever had an encounter where you realized you were completely at the mercy of someone who wasn't playing by the rules? Tell me about it in the comments. If these true survival stories are keeping you on the edge of your seat, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to Creepy Digest. It tells the algorithm to push these stories out to more people. Now, let's get into our final story and find out what happens when simply watching becomes the most dangerous thing you can do. Story 3. The Eat Street Panopticon. If you want to understand how a totalitarian state truly operates, you have to understand the panopticon. It's a concept where the people police themselves because they are terrified they are always being watched. But during Operation Metro Surge, the government realized that to make the panopticon work, they had to violently eliminate anyone who dared to watch them. It was Saturday morning, January 24th. I was walking down Nicollet Avenue in South Minneapolis, an area locals call Eat Street. It's famous for its diverse restaurants, coffee shops, and vibrant community. It was the kind of place where people felt safe. I was carrying a cup of coffee, enjoying the crisp morning air, when I noticed a commotion outside a local donut shop at the corner of 26th Street. 2 ICE agents were harassing a man who was clearly just a rideshare driver picking up an order. The local employees, terrified by the agent's aggression, actually locked the doors to the shop, pulling the driver inside to protect him. The agents were furious that civilians had defied them. They got on their radios. Within 3 minutes, Eat Street was transformed into a militarized zone. Dozens of federal agents flooded the intersection, blocking traffic and drawing their weapons. A crowd of locals started to gather on the sidewalks. We were all on edge after the murder of Renee Good earlier that month. People pulled out their cell phones and started recording. It was our only defense: civilian oversight. One of the people filming was a man named Alex Preddy. He was 37, an intensive care nurse for the VA hospital, and a legally licensed gun owner. He was standing near the curb, holding his phone up, trying to direct civilian traffic away from the chaos. The agents hated the cameras. They began aggressively advancing on the crowd, screaming at us to disperse. I was standing near the front. An agent wearing a tactical vest shoved me hard in the chest. I stumbled backward. He shoved me again, harder, and my feet slipped on the icy pavement. I crashed hard onto the asphalt, scraping my hands. Before the agent could put his knee on my neck, Alex stepped in. His instincts as an ICU nurse, as a protector, kicked in. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't throw a punch. He stepped between the aggressive agent and me, putting a hand on the agent's waist to stop his forward momentum, and wrapped his other arm around my shoulder to shield me. The retaliation was instantaneous and brutal. The agent pulled a massive canister of military-grade pepper spray and blasted Alex point blank in the face. Alex cried out in agony, raising his left hand to protect his eyes, while his right hand still clutched his cell phone. He was blinded. The agent then violently tackled him. Because Alex had his arm around me, we both went down together in a tangle of limbs. The concrete slammed into my jaw. In a fraction of a second, 6 massive federal agents swarmed Alex. They pinned him face down on the freezing street. They pressed his arms tightly against his head. He was completely immobilized. He couldn't see, he couldn't move, and he was completely defenseless. I was dragged a few feet away by another agent. They threw their weight onto my back, crushing the breath out of my lungs, and violently twisted my arms behind my back. The steel handcuffs clicked shut, biting so deeply into my wrists that my fingers immediately went numb. The nerve damage I sustained that day is permanent. They dragged me across the asphalt and threw me into the back of an idling ICE transport van. Through the tinted glass of the van's rear window, I had a front row seat to the darkest moment in Minnesota history. While Alex was pinned face down by 6 men, an agent in a gray jacket reached down to Alex's hip. He unclasped Alex's holster and purposefully removed Alex's legally permitted handgun. Alex was now entirely disarmed. He had no weapon. He was pinned to the ground by 1,000 pounds of tactical gear. They waited roughly 8 seconds. And then, the theater of death began. "He's got a gun!" An agent suddenly screamed at the top of his lungs. "He's got a gun!" It was a total fabricated lie. It was a verbal authorization for execution, shouted purely for the benefit of the body cameras. 5 seconds later, a Border Patrol agent named Jesus Ochoa, standing behind the pinned and unarmed Alex, drew his sidearm. He aimed down at the helpless nurse's back and pulled the trigger. The agent who had pepper sprayed him drew his gun and joined in. They fired 10 rounds into Alex Preddy in under 5 seconds. The concussive blasts echoed off the brick buildings of Eat Street. They continued to shoot him even after his body went completely limp on the pavement. I was trapped inside the metal box of the ICE van, watching a public execution. I thought I was next. When you watch the government murder a man in broad daylight, you realize your life holds absolutely zero value. The agents across the street slowly backed away from Alex's bleeding body. They didn't render first aid. A pediatrician in the crowd ran forward, begging to help him. But the agents demanded she physically produce her medical license before they let her touch him. By the time they let the paramedics through, Alex was gone. I was sobbing hysterically in the back of the van, terrified and in agonizing pain. I looked at the agent standing guard outside the doors. "Please," I begged through the metal grate. "Why did you do that? Please don't kill me." The agent looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "Shut up," he said. "Stop being hysterical." They rounded up 24 civilian witnesses that day and detained us in a federal building for hours, trying to intimidate us into silence. They told the media Alex was a terrorist. But the videos survived. The world saw what they did. They shot Alex Preddy because he watched them. They tortured me so that I would be too afraid to ever speak out again. When a state can execute a man on the street for holding a cell phone, the horror isn't coming, it's already here. The perimeter of safety is gone. If they can do it on Eat Street, they can do it on your street. Sleep with one eye open, lock your doors, and pray you never catch their attention. If you take anything away from these stories, let it be this. The perimeter of safety is an illusion. When the system designed to protect you decides to turn inward, the 4 walls of your home aren't enough to keep the monsters out. I want to hear your thoughts on this dark chapter of American history. Sound off in the comments below. Let's get a discussion going. If you have your own true, terrifying encounters with urban survival, unmarked vans, or the dark side of your city, please comment it below. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe to Creepy Digest so you never miss an upload. Lock your doors, and thanks for watching.